Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take your reading list, find the crucial insights, and deliver them fast. It's kind of your shortcut to getting really well informed, maybe finding some surprising things along the way.
Yeah, cutting through the noise.
Exactly. And for you, the learner, listening in, we know you want the full picture, but, without getting totally swamped.
We aim for clear, engaging, and respecting your time.
So today, we are diving deep into higher education in Taiwan. Specifically, we're looking at the future, the state of things now, and this really big initiative called the Deep Rooting Project.
Right. Right. And also this national push for what's termed overall excellence.
Okay, and sources we're working from.
It's a good mix. We've got a transcript from a forum, like a panel discussion with education experts. Then some articles digging into higher education reform and the Deep Rooting Project itself. Also the research guide that sort of set up that forum discussion.
Okay.
And even a short piece looking at how all these challenges in higher ed might connect indirectly to student self-efficacy.
Interesting angle. So the big goal today is to figure out how Taiwan's trying to achieve this excellence.
Yeah, looking at the Deep Rooting Project, understanding its scale. I mean, the funding is significant.
It really is. We're talking, 85 billion NTD in the first phase, 97 billion in the second?
That's right, totaling 182 billion NTD.
Wow. So huge investment. We need to look at that, the challenges they're facing, like this M-shaped development idea.
Definitely. And just the different opinions on how effective it all is and where it should go next.
Okay, let's start there then. This push for overall excellence. What does that actually mean in the Taiwanese context?
Well, the idea is really about lifting the entire system. It's not just focusing, on a couple of elite universities.
Right. So improving quality across the board.
Exactly. A system-wide enhancement. And the Deep Rooting Project is the main way they're trying to do it.
With that huge budget split into two phases.
Yeah. First phase, 2018 to 2022, 85 billion. And now we're in the second phase, 2023 to 2027, with 97 billion NTD.
So that first phase.
Yeah.
What were they focused on? What were the initial priorities?
There are basically four main goals laid out. First, teaching innovation, trying to improve how students actually learn.
Okay, makes sense.
Second, enhancing public accessibility, making higher education more open, more inclusive.
Good.
Third, developing university distinctiveness, helping each university find and build on its unique strengths.
So less cookie-cutter universities.
That's the idea. And finally, fulfilling social responsibility, USR, universities engaging with society, solving local problems.
USR, like community projects, applying research locally.
Precisely. Things like environmental projects, community development initiatives, using the university's expertise.
Okay, that's a pretty broad remit.
Yeah.
How do they structure the funding for all this? How does the money actually get to the universities?
It's split into two main streams. About 20% of the money is this inclusive subsidy.
Inclusive, so spread more widely.
Yeah, designed to help lots of universities improve their general quality and develop their specific character.
Okay, the 20%, what about the rest?
The other 80%, the much bigger chunk, is competitive funding, Kiero.
Competitive. So universities have to fight for it.
Pretty much. This part is aimed at universities that show potential for international excellence, setting up top-tier research centers.
So an example of the inclusive funding might be like a new teaching program.
Yeah, maybe something tailored to local industry, whereas the competitive funding might go towards, say, a really advanced semiconductor lab.
Got it. But this 80-20 split, the emphasis on competition, that seems to be where some concerns pop up.
Exactly. This is where the idea of M-shaped development comes into play. It's a major worry highlighted in our sources.
Okay, break that down for us. M-shaped development.
It essentially describes this polarization happening. You have the top universities getting richer, more resources.
The peak on one side of the M.
Right, and then universities at the other end facing more financial strain, maybe struggling.
The other peak.
Yeah, and the universities in the middle, that tier is shrinking, hollowing out. That's the dip in the M.
And experts are linking this trend directly to the Deep Rooting Project's funding model because of the 80% competitive part.
Yes, that heavy emphasis on competitive grants is seen by some as potentially driving this polarization.
We actually have a quote from that forum transcript that speaks right to this. Let me find it. Here. Sure. NCNU, shady on the flow sense. Yeah, see how funny. Sure who he is, basically saying universities are heading towards this M shape. It's a concern.
And it goes on, right?
Yeah.
About distinctiveness fading.
Yeah. So the worry is universities are losing their unique features, becoming more similar, while this divide grows.
Which is quite ironic given that distinctiveness was one of the project's original goals.
Exactly. So the fear is that the competitive funding, while maybe pushing some towards global excellence, is actually concentrating resources and making it harder for others to thrive, or even just maintain their unique identities.
It's a real tension. This could really impact regional development, too, if those mid-tier universities that serve local communities struggle.
Hmm. Another big debate that came up in that forum was about international rankings. Seems like there's a lot of focus on climbing those global league tables.
There definitely is, but there was also quite a bit of skepticism expressed by the experts.
Skepticism about whether it's the right goal.
Yeah, questioning if this relentless chase for higher rankings is the best use of resources compared to, building fundamental strengths internally.
Was there that quote about how long it might actually take to compete at the very top?
Oh yeah, quite blunt. Someone basically said, "Yujan Zhang," meaning competing in Asia is one thing. Tom, but against the really top global players, maybe even 100 years is optimistic.
Wow.
Jai hatcha haman hapwa. How tell you si wei yo arhadere? Jinkatis on ju you aste. Till. Here's a horse the Chirina. So maybe possible if done right over a century, but the current approach seems problematic.
So the sentiment is maybe it's a bit of a long shot, and resources could be used differently.
That seems to be the undercurrent, yes. And it connects to this issue of resource allocation again.
And it wasn't just the top research universities focusing on rankings, right? Even the vocational ones.
That's right. The SENA, the vocational and technical universities, are apparently getting involved in the rankings game too.
Which raised some eyebrows among the experts.
It did, because it begs the question, are these rankings, often heavily weighted towards academic research, really the right way to measure the success of a vocational university?
Their mission is different, right? More about practical skills, industry links.
Exactly. So pouring resources into chasing rankings based on criteria that don't fully align with their core mission, well, you have to ask if that's the most strategic approach.
Especially when a lot of that competitive funding is going to so-called globally linked universities, perhaps partly justified by ranking potential.
It definitely fuels the debate about whether the funding distribution is optimal for the whole diverse system.
It also sounds like there's a bit of a disconnect between the project itself and how universities operate day to day, like a feeling of the project being separate from the university's own initiatives.
That definitely came across. Some experts felt the deep-rooting project operates somewhat parallel to the university's own organic innovation efforts.
Creating extra work.
Yeah, the administrative load was mentioned specifically, needing separate teams just to handle the project applications, reporting, all that stuff.
There's a quote about that too, isn't there? Something about parallel admin structures.
Yes.
Basically, the project is separate from university autonomy. Universities have to plan within its framework.
Right, and Stabahri. So regular admin and teaching staff are one thing. Then there's this project admin layer on top.
Meaning if the university doesn't integrate it well, it becomes really difficult and tiring to manage.
That sounds like a recipe for frustration and maybe diverting focus from actual teaching and research.
It could certainly be a drain on resources and energy. And it raises questions about sustainability. What happens when the project funding ends? Do these initiatives just disappear?
Good point. And then there was Professor Huang Zhengji's point about measurement, about the difference between indicators and actual goals.
Yes, that was crucial. He pointed out a potential mismatch.
What was his specific concern?
He said essentially, we love using performance indicators in these projects, but indicators aren't the same as the objectives.
TAIO, tu si tu ali king, tu fiung fu ali li, tu sin dung tu li sing, chiu ama li shila, pim te. You can tick all the boxes, have all the indicators look great on paper, but if the actual underlying goal isn't achieved, then you've got a problem.
So you could hit your targets for, say, number of publications, but maybe teaching quality hasn't actually improved.
Precisely. Or you increase international partnerships, but access for local students remains unequal. The metrics look good, but the real mission isn't accomplished.
That's a really vital distinction. So with all these issues, the M-shape, the ranking debate, the admin burden, the measurement problem, is there a feeling that maybe deeper changes are needed beyond just tweaking the project?
Well, there's definitely an argument for that. One of the articles we looked at, though, omatissimo sin the nobu kuli in this one allow, an award drawing organism system example, reforming the higher education system. Pursuing true strength makes exactly that case.
Pursuing true strength, not just looking strong. What kind of reforms does it suggest?
It calls for more fundamental shifts. Things like changing the actual evaluation and funding methods used system-wide, granting universities more genuine autonomy, reducing what some see as unnecessary competition, and really shifting the focus back to student development and the overall well-being of the universities as places for learning and research.
So moving away from maybe purely quantitative measures toward something more holistic.
That seems to be the core idea, yeah. Building genuine capability rather than just chasing metrics.
Okay, so there's a call for systemic reform. What about more specific suggestions that came out of the forum or other sources? What solutions were put on the table?
There is a whole raft of ideas, actually. A lot of calls for more policy coherence, more transparency from the government side.
Makes sense.
Encouraging universities to really own the project goals, integrate them better, and importantly, share best practices and failures more openly.
Learning from each other.
Right. Some even suggested maybe scaling back the deep rooting project itself.
Really? How so?
Well, taking the parts that have proven successful and just integrating them into the normal, ongoing operations and funding of universities rather than keeping it as a separate, massive project.
Interesting. Make the good stuff standard practice.
Exactly. Also, shifting towards funding that's more guidance-oriented, tied to clear policy goals, instead of being so heavily based on competitive grant proposals.
What else?
Developing strong long-term strategic plans within each university was seen as key.
Right.
Streamlining all the different government funding pots available, ensuring a basic level of funding for all universities, but then offering differentiated support based on what kind of institution it is, research, teaching, vocational.
So recognizing their different missions in the funding model.
Precisely.
Were there any more contentious ideas?
Well, the idea of loosening the rules around tuition fees was definitely raised as something to discuss.
Always a tricky one.
Always. And establishing a better, more sustainable way to make high-level decisions about higher education policy, maybe a dedicated committee at the executive level.
Like a permanent steering group.
Something like that. Regularly updating the national blueprint for higher education.
Be the idea of you. And the idea of university autonomy came up again.
Yes. Revisiting the idea of incorporating national universities. To give them more freedom. But with a twist suggesting university councils instead of the perhaps more corporate-sounding boards of directors.
Trying to find the right governance model.
It seems so. And constantly reiterating the need to recognize the distinct goals of general universities versus the technical and vocational colleges.
Don't treat them the same.
Right. Plus, specific calls to support fundamental research and build world-class research centers in key areas.
It's quite a list. Any really standout perspectives?
Professor Liu Yunjun had a strong take. He actually argued against using the word excellence altogether.
Oh, what did he prefer?
Sound development. He felt excellence could be misleading or put too much pressure in the wrong places.
Interesting philosophical point.
And he had a radical structural suggestion, too. Merge the Ministry of Education with the National Science and Technology Council.
Wow, combine education and research policy at the top level.
Yeah, for better integration. Shows a level of thinking going on.
And even the name Deep Rooting Project itself, wasn't straightforward.
No, apparently there were discussions about its meaning. Some interpreted it more like sprouting, suggesting new beginnings, while others maybe more cynically suggested deep profit.
Shows how language itself can frame the debate. Okay, one last thread. This connection, however indirect, to student self-efficacy. How might these big systemic issues filter down to individual students?
Well, the analysis we saw didn't draw direct lines like A causes B, but it suggested the context created by these issues could play a role.
Oh, so?
For instance, think about that M-shaped distribution. If students come from very different backgrounds and end up in universities with vastly different resources,
That could impact their experience and confidence.
plausibly, yeah. Or the intense pressure on universities to hit ranking metrics, does that focus attention away from supporting diverse student needs or developing skills that build genuine confidence?
Mhm.
The debate between education as a public good versus purely pursuing excellence might also affect how students perceive the value of their own learning journey.
And unequal resources could mean unequal support services, learning environments.
Exactly. All these factors, resource gaps, the focus of evaluation, the core mission debates, they create an environment, and that environment could indirectly influence how confident and competent students feel. It's not deterministic, but it's a potential factor to consider.
Right. So it's less about the project directly causing low self-efficacy and more about the whole system creating conditions that might make it harder for some students to thrive and believe in themselves.
That's a good way to put it. The systemic context matters for the individual experience.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, this deep dive has really shown, I think, the sheer ambition behind Taiwan's higher education goals with the Deep Rooting Project.
Definitely ambitious. Huge investment, aiming for system-wide improvement, fostering unique strengths.
But also, it's highlighted some really significant tensions and debates.
Oh, absolutely. That balance between competition and collaboration, or equity, the real value of international rankings versus internal development.
The ongoing struggle for genuine university autonomy versus project requirements.
And that critical point about making sure the way we measure success actually aligns with the real goals we're trying to achieve.
So for you, the listener, hopefully this gives you a clearer picture of these complex dynamics. It really makes you think, how might these kinds of systemic issues affect students where you are?
Yeah, and what's the right role for government, for universities, for society, in shaping higher education's future? These aren't just Taiwanese questions.
True. It seems the pursuit of overall excellence wherever you are isn't just about funding or rankings. It's a continuous journey.
Requires real reflection, adaptation, and asking hard questions about what truly measures success for students and for society.
A lot to think about. We definitely encourage you to dig into the sources if you want more detail and keep engaging with these important questions.